The pressure readings jumped again, and I had to blink twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things. The numbers on my screen flickered between normal parameters and something that made absolutely no sense, like the rock 3 kilometers down was pushing back against our drill. "Director Thorne," I called across the control room, but he held up one finger without looking away from his video conference. Through the speakers, I caught fragments of corporate buzzwords floating around: revolutionary energy paradigm and unprecedented profit margins. The usual stuff that made my engineering brain want to crawl into a corner and hide. I pulled up the seismic data again. Those rhythmic vibrations were still there, pulsing through the ocean floor in patterns that looked almost organized, every 12 seconds, like clockwork. I'd run diagnostics on the sensors 3 times already, but everything checked out perfectly. "Gian, you're being paranoid," I muttered to myself, adjusting the display filters. Equipment interference happened all the time at these depths. The pressure down there could mess with any sensitive instruments, and we were pushing deeper than anyone had ever gone before. Through the reinforced windows, I watched Robert and James working the drill controls on the platform below. They moved with the easy confidence of guys who'd done this 1,000 times, Robert calling out pressure readings while James adjusted the rotation speed. 6 weeks of this routine, and they had it down to a science. "Guarantee you, gentlemen, we'll have preliminary energy extraction within the month," Eris was saying to his screen full of suits. "The thermal output readings are beyond our most optimistic projections." The pressure spiked again. This time it held for almost 30 seconds before dropping back to normal. I stood up. "Director, I really need to—" 48 hours, Eris continued, still not looking at me. "Maybe less if these readings stay consistent." The executives on screen were practically salivating. I could see dollar signs reflecting in their eyes even from across the room. One of them leaned forward, his pixelated face eager. "And you're certain the geological surveys support sustained extraction?" "Absolutely. Dr. Carter's analysis confirms we're looking at the most powerful geothermal system ever discovered. Clean, unlimited energy that'll make fossil fuels look like stone tools." I walked over and stood directly in his line of sight. "Director Thorne." He finally looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "I'm in the middle of something important, Gian." "So am I. These pressure variations aren't normal. We're seeing fluctuations that don't match any geological models, and the seismic sensors are picking up routine drilling complications," he said, turning back to the screen. "Gentlemen, as I was saying, we're ahead of schedule and under budget. Everything is proceeding exactly as planned." I wanted to grab his perfectly pressed collar and shake him. Instead, I pulled up the data on my tablet and held it where he couldn't ignore it. "Look at these readings. The pressure changes are too regular, too organized. And these vibrations, equipment interference." He didn't even glance at the screen. "We're operating at unprecedented depths with experimental technology. Some anomalous readings are expected." The executives were nodding along, completely uninterested in technical details that might slow down their profit train. One of them checked his watch. "Director Thorne, we have another meeting in 5 minutes. Can you confirm the timeline?" "Breach within 48 hours. Energy extraction within 30 days. Eris smiled his corporate smile. "I stake my career on it." I stepped back, clutching my tablet. Around the station, everyone else went about their normal routines. Sarah and Timothy were running diagnostics and engineering, their voices carrying through the comm system as they checked life support efficiency. Kelly was updating maintenance logs, while Michael prepped equipment for the next shift. Down in the geology lab, Ben hunched over his microscope, examining the latest core samples. He'd been spending more time down there lately, running tests that seemed to take longer than usual. But he hadn't mentioned anything unusual, so I figured he was just being thorough. The video conference wrapped up with handshakes and promises. As soon as the screen went dark, Aris turned to me with barely contained frustration. "Gian, I need you to understand something. We have $12 million in daily operational costs. 12 million. Every day we delay is money bleeding into the ocean, and those men expect results. I understand the pressure, but do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to sabotage 6 months of planning over some sensor glitches." The accusation hit like a slap. "I'm trying to keep this crew safe. These readings don't make sense, and when things don't make sense at this depth, people die. The readings are within acceptable parameters for experimental deep-sea drilling. End of discussion." He straightened his uniform and headed for the door. "I want a full systems check completed by tomorrow morning. If you find actual equipment malfunctions, we'll address them. If not, I don't want to hear another word about anomalous data." The door slid shut behind him, leaving me alone with my screens full of impossible numbers. I slumped back into my chair and pulled up the seismic data one more time. Those rhythmic pulses stared back at me, steady as a heartbeat. 12 seconds apart, every single time. I'd never seen geological activity that regular, that purposeful. Maybe Aris was right. Maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed, letting the isolation and pressure get to me. We were further from the surface than humans had any right to be, drilling into places that had been untouched for millions of years. A little paranoia was probably normal. But as I watched the numbers scroll past, something cold settled in my stomach. The patterns were too clean, too organized. Rock didn't behave like this. Rock didn't pulse with biological rhythms. The intercom crackled to life, and Aris's voice filled the control room. "Attention all crew. I'm pleased to announce that drilling operations are proceeding ahead of schedule. Based on current progress, we will breach the primary geothermal chamber within 48 hours. This represents a significant milestone for both our mission and the future of clean energy." Cheers echoed from the drilling platform below. Robert and James exchanged grins and bumped fists. Even Ben looked up from his microscope with something like excitement. I stared at my screens, watching those impossible pressure readings fluctuate in their perfect rhythmic patterns. 48 hours to breach the chamber. 48 hours to find out what was really down there, pulsing in the dark, 3 kilometers below us. The numbers jumped again, and this time I could swear they jumped in response to Aris's announcement. 20 minutes after Aris made his announcement, my tablet chimed with an urgent message from Ben. "Need you in the lab immediately. Bring your diagnostic equipment." I grabbed my sensor array toolkit and headed down to the geology lab, finding Ben hunched over his workstation with about 6 different displays running simultaneously. Core samples were scattered across his desk, and the microscope's imaging system projected magnified views onto the main screen. "Tell me your sensors are malfunctioning," he said without looking up. "I've run diagnostics 3 times. Everything checks out perfectly." I set my equipment down and moved closer to see what had him so focused. "What are you looking at?" He gestured to the microscope display. Rock strata from 3 kilometers down, except it's not rock. The image showed what should have been compressed sediment and mineral deposits. Instead, I was looking at something that resembled biological tissue under extreme magnification, organized structures with defined boundaries, like cell membranes, and running through everything were branching networks that looked disturbingly familiar. "Those look like blood vessels," I said. "That's because they are blood vessels." Ben switched to a different sample. "Look at this one." The new image showed crystalline formations embedded in the tissue-like matrix. As I watched, the crystals pulsed with faint bioluminescent patterns, creating waves of light that traveled along the vascular networks. Ben, this is impossible. We're drilling through solid rock. Are we? He pulled up a chemical analysis on his secondary monitor. I've been testing the fluid that's been seeping up from the drill site. Hemoglobin, platelets, white blood cells, all mixed with superheated minerals and trace metals. It's blood, Gian. We're drilling into something that bleeds. I stared at the data, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. Equipment contamination. Has to be. Maybe biological matter from the ocean floor got mixed into the samples. I thought the same thing. Ben switched to another display showing thermal imaging from the drill site. But look at this. The heat signatures around our drilling point show organized circulation patterns. The temperature fluctuations follow the same 12-second rhythm you've been tracking in the pressure readings. The thermal map looked like a circulatory system responding to trauma. Hot zones pulsed outward from the drill site in regular waves, exactly matching the seismic patterns I'd been monitoring upstairs. Run your diagnostics again, Ben said. Every sensor, every array. Because if our equipment is working correctly, we're not drilling into a geothermal chamber. I connected my diagnostic equipment to his lab systems and started running comprehensive checks. Seismic sensors, thermal imaging, chemical analysis, microscopy calibration. Everything came back green. No malfunctions, no interference, no equipment errors. All systems nominal, I said, though the words felt wrong coming out of my mouth. Ben nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid of. We spent the next hour examining more samples, running additional tests, cross-referencing data. Every analysis pointed to the same impossible conclusion. The geological formation we were drilling through contained organized biological structures on a massive scale. We need to show this to Eris, I said finally. He's not going to want to hear it. He needs to hear it. If we're drilling into some kind of living organism, we have to stop before... Before what? Before we hurt it? Ben gestured to the thermal imaging. Look at these circulation patterns. Whatever this thing is, it's already responding to our drilling like an immune system responding to infection. I pulled up my pressure readings on his main display, overlaying them with his thermal data. The patterns matched perfectly. Biological rhythms on a scale that defied comprehension. How big do you think it is? I asked. Ben was quiet for a long moment, studying the data. Based on the seismic readings and thermal distribution, conservative estimate, maybe 50 kilometers across, could be bigger. The number hit me like a physical blow. We weren't just drilling into something alive. We were drilling into something the size of a small city. Eris needs to see this now, I said, gathering up the most compelling data files. We found him in his office, reviewing operational reports with the satisfied expression of someone whose corporate presentation had gone exactly as planned. He looked up when we entered, and his smile faded at our expressions. Please tell me, you're here to report that you've identified the equipment malfunctions, he said. There are no equipment malfunctions, Ben replied. Every system is operating within normal parameters. Then what's the problem? I activated the wall display and pulled up our compiled data. The problem is that we're not drilling into rock. We're drilling into biological tissue. Eris stared at the images for several seconds, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally irritation. This is obviously contaminated data. Biological matter from the ocean floor, equipment interference, something. We've verified everything multiple times, Ben said. The chemical analysis alone is clearly wrong. Iris stood up and moved to the display, studying the microscopic images. Dr. Carter, You're suggesting we're drilling into some kind of living creature, 50 kilometers across. Do you understand how ridiculous that sounds? I understand how it sounds, but the data is wrong. It has to be wrong. Eris turned to face us both. I want every piece of equipment recalibrated, every sensor array, every analysis system, every diagnostic tool. Run the tests again until you get readings that make sense. Eris, we can't just ignore... I'm not ignoring anything. I'm asking you to do your jobs properly. His voice carried the sharp edge of someone whose authority was being questioned. We have $12 million in daily operational costs and a board of directors expecting results. I will not halt operations based on obviously flawed data. Through his office windows, I could see the drilling platform where Robert and James continued their work, completely unaware of what we'd discovered. The drill pushed deeper with each passing minute, boring into tissue that pulsed with alien life. What if we're wrong? I asked. What if the data is accurate and we're actually drilling into something alive? Then we're about to make the greatest scientific discovery in human history, and we're going to do it on schedule. Aris returned to his desk. Recalibrate your equipment. I want new readings by tomorrow morning. Ben and I exchanged glances. There was no point in arguing further. Eris had made his decision, and corporate pressure outweighed scientific caution. As we headed back to the lab, my tablet chimed with an alert from the external monitoring systems. I pulled up the camera feeds and stopped walking. Ben, look at this. The external cameras showed the sea floor around our drilling site, normally populated by scattered deep-sea creatures going about their solitary business. But now, hundreds of chitinous crabs and bioluminescent tube worms were moving toward the drill site in organized formations. They arranged themselves in geometric patterns around the drilling point, their movements coordinated like soldiers taking defensive positions. That's not normal behavior, Ben said. As we watched, more creatures emerged from the darkness, things I'd never seen before, with crystalline shells and pulsing organs visible through translucent skin. They joined the defensive formations, creating concentric circles around the drill site. My comm unit crackled with Robert's voice from the drilling platform. Control, we're getting some weird interference down here. Local fauna is throwing themselves at the drill head. Nothing dangerous, just slowing us down with organic debris. I switched to the drill head camera and watched as creatures deliberately hurled themselves into the spinning mechanism. Their bodies created brief blockages that the drill powered through, but the pattern was unmistakable. They were trying to stop us. It's an immune response, Ben said quietly. The local organisms are trying to protect their host. The implications settled over me like cold water. We weren't just drilling into something alive. We were drilling into something that had its own ecosystem, its own defensive mechanisms, and we were less than 48 hours away from breaching whatever lay at its heart. The drill bit finally punched through at 3:47 a.m., and all hell broke loose. I was monitoring the pressure readings when they spiked beyond anything we'd ever recorded. The numbers climbed so fast my screen couldn't keep up, red warnings flashing across every display as something massive pushed back from 3 kilometers down. "Robert, shut it down!" I yelled into the comm, but the drilling platform was already chaos. Thick, glowing fluid erupted up the shaft like a geyser, flooding the platform with superheated liquid that pulsed with its own bioluminescent light. The stuff looked like molten gold mixed with liquid starlight, and it was coming up fast with the pressure of a volcanic eruption. The primary pressure valve couldn't handle it. The explosion sent a shockwave through the entire station, and I watched in horror as Robert got caught in the blast. The scalding steam and alien fluid sprayed everywhere, turning the drilling platform into a nightmare of hissing metal and glowing contamination. "James, get him out of there!" I activated every emergency protocol I could think of, sealing blast doors and rerouting ventilation systems. Through the platform cameras, I saw James dragging Robert toward the medical bay. Robert wasn't moving on his own, and even from this distance I could see the damage. His skin looked like charred meat where the fluid had hit him, blistered and blackened across most of his body. "Sarah, I need emergency medical in the drilling section," I called over the comm. "Already on it," she replied, her voice tight with professional focus. "Activating containment protocols and emergency life support." I sealed the drilling floor, but my screens were already showing contamination alerts throughout the lower levels. The alien fluid had gotten into everything: ventilation systems, water reclamation, even the electrical conduits were showing traces of the glowing substance. "Timothy, shut down the circulation pumps," I ordered. "We've got contaminated fluid in the water system." "Copy that. Isolating affected sections now." But it was too late. The damage reports kept coming in. Kelly reported steam exposure in the maintenance corridors. Michael had been near the drilling platform when the valve blew. Even some of the crew on upper levels had been caught by contaminated vapor that traveled through the ventilation system before I could seal it off. The alien fluid kept pulsing through the transparent sections of the drill shaft, creating an eerie glow that bathed the entire lower level in shifting patterns of light. It moved like it was alive, flowing in rhythmic waves that matched those same 12-second intervals I'd been tracking for days. I ran down to the medical bay where Ben was working on Robert with grim efficiency. Robert lay unconscious on the treatment table, his body a mess of burns and blisters. The smell of antiseptic couldn't quite cover the metallic scent of whatever that fluid had done to him. "How bad?" I asked. "Burns across 60% of his body, 3rd degree in most places." Ben didn't look up from his work. "I've got him stabilized, but this isn't like any thermal injury I've seen before. The fluid seems to have caused some kind of chemical reaction with his skin tissue." Through the medical bay windows, I could see the drill shaft glowing like a lighthouse beacon. The bioluminescent patterns pulsed hypnotically, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "Jian." Eris appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with excitement despite the chaos. "Preliminary analysis of the fluid? Are you serious right now? We have injured crew members and contamination throughout half the station. And we have successful breach of the primary chamber. This is exactly what we came here to accomplish." I stared at him. Robert might die. Robert knew the risks. We all did. Eris moved to the window overlooking the drill shaft. "Look at that flow rate. The energy potential is beyond our wildest projections." Ben finally looked up from his patient. "Director, this fluid isn't like anything in our geological databases. The chemical composition alone is revolutionary." "I know." Eris turned back to us with the satisfied expression of someone whose gamble had paid off. "I want full analysis within 6 hours. Thermal output, energy density, extraction viability. The board is going to want comprehensive data." "The board can wait," I said. "We need to focus on containment and crew safety. We need to focus on why we're here. This accident proves the system is more powerful than we anticipated. A few operational adjustments, and we'll be extracting clean energy on an unprecedented scale." I wanted to grab him and shake some sense into his corporate brain, but my tablet was chiming with new alerts. The external cameras were showing something that made my stomach drop. The seafloor around our drill site was glowing. The same bioluminescent patterns that pulsed through the shaft were spreading outward in concentric circles, turning the ocean bottom into a living constellation of light. And the creatures were coming. Not the scattered few we'd seen before, but thousands of them. chitinous crabs and tube worms, things with crystalline shells and translucent bodies, organisms I'd never seen in any deep-sea biology textbook. They moved toward the station in perfect formation, arranging themselves in geometric patterns around our hull. "Aris, look at this." I held up the tablet showing the external feeds. He glanced at the screen and shrugged. "Local fauna responding to the thermal event. Perfectly normal." "This isn't normal. They're organizing. Look at those formations." But he was already heading for the door. 6 hours, Jian. I want that analysis." Ben and I watched him leave, then turned back to the external cameras. The creatures weren't just gathering. They were building something. Using their own bodies as construction material, they created barriers and structures around the drill site, like white blood cells forming a protective barrier around a wound. "It's an immune response," Ben said quietly. "The host organism is trying to protect itself." Robert stirred on the medical table, making a sound that wasn't quite human. When I looked at his burned skin, I could swear I saw faint patterns of light flickering beneath the damaged tissue, pulsing in rhythm with the fluid flowing through the drill shaft below. I woke up to the sound of humming. Not the kind of humming someone does while working. This was mechanical, rhythmic, like a machine running at perfect frequency. It was coming from the medical bay, and it had been going on for who knows how long. I checked my tablet. 12 hours since the breach. 12 hours since Robert got caught in that explosion of alien fluid, and now he was making sounds like a piece of equipment. The medical bay door slid open with its usual soft hiss, but the humming got louder. Ben stood over Robert's bed, holding a tablet and looking like he hadn't slept at all, which, knowing Ben, he probably hadn't. "How's he doing?" I asked, though one look at Robert answered my question. The burns were gone. Not healed. Replaced. Where blistered, charred skin had covered 60% of his body yesterday, now there were smooth, crystalline formations that looked like black obsidian. The stuff grew in perfect geometric patterns across his chest and arms, creating angular designs that caught the medical bay's fluorescent lights and threw them back in rainbow fragments. "His vital signs are stable," Ben said without looking up from his tablet. "Temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, all normal. But look at this." He turned the tablet toward me, showing readouts I'd never seen before. Complex data streams scrolled past in real time, displaying biological processes that didn't match anything in our medical databases. "What am I looking at?" "I have no idea. The monitors started picking up these signals about 3 hours ago." Ben gestured to the crystalline formations on Robert's skin. "Those growths are conducting electricity. They're interfacing with our equipment somehow." I moved closer to Robert's bed. His breathing had that same mechanical rhythm as the humming, each inhale and exhale perfectly timed. When I leaned over him, his eyes snapped open. They were silver. Not gray, not light blue. Metallic silver, like polished chrome. His pupils contracted and dilated as they tracked my movement with the precision of a camera lens focusing. "Robert?" I said. "Can you hear me?" He stared at me for several seconds, those silver eyes processing something I couldn't understand. Then he closed them again and resumed his mechanical breathing. "He hasn't spoken since the transformation accelerated," Ben said. "But watch this." He pulled up the diagnostic interface on the medical monitors. Lines of data I'd never seen before were streaming across the displays. Complex readouts showing cellular activity, electrical conductivity, and something labeled as network integration status. "The equipment is receiving data directly from his tissue," Ben explained. "These crystalline formations aren't just replacing his skin, they're turning him into some kind of biological interface." My tablet chimed with an alert from the station's electrical systems. Minor fluctuations in power distribution, nothing serious, but the timing felt wrong. Ben, I need to check something. I pulled up the station's personnel tracking system. Where are Sarah, James, and Michael right now? He checked his own tablet. Sarah's in the water reclamation facility. James is working on ventilation maintenance in Section C. Michael's doing routine checks on the electrical grid. All in different areas, all working on systems that got contaminated yesterday. So, I ran a quick diagnostic on the electrical grid and found what I was looking for. Someone's been making unauthorized modifications to the power distribution network. Small changes, nothing that would trigger major alerts, but they're creating feedback loops that serve no obvious function. The humming from Robert's bed shifted slightly in pitch, and the data streams on the medical monitors spiked. Gian, look at his hands. Robert's fingers were moving, tracing patterns in the air above his chest. The movements were precise and repetitive, like he was drawing electrical schematics from memory. I activated my comm unit. Sarah, this is Gian. Can you report your current status? Running efficiency diagnostics on the water reclamation system, came her immediate reply, making some minor adjustments to improve filtration rates. What kind of adjustments? Rerouting flow patterns through secondary processors, standard optimization procedures. Her voice sounded normal, professional, but something felt off. Sarah was thorough, but she wasn't the type to make unauthorized system modifications without filing proper reports. Sarah, I need you to document any changes you're making and submit them for approval before implementation. Of course. I'll have the reports ready within the hour. I switched channels. James, what's your status on the ventilation maintenance? Replacing some corroded junction boxes in Section C. Found some unusual wear patterns that need addressing. Unusual how? Crystalline deposits in the electrical connections. Probably mineral buildup from the contaminated steam yesterday. I'm installing new components with better corrosion resistance. Ben and I exchanged glances. Crystalline deposits in the electrical systems, just like the formations growing on Robert's skin. James, I want you to stop work and report to the control room for debriefing. I'm almost finished here. Give me another 20 minutes to complete the installation. Now, James. There was a pause. Understood. On my way. But when I checked the personnel tracker, James was still in Section C. And according to the system logs, he was still actively working on the electrical connections. Ben, we have a problem. Robert's humming grew louder, and the medical monitor started displaying new data streams. The readings showed network connectivity status, data transfer rates, and something called integration progress. That was climbing steadily toward 100%. My tablet chimed with another alert. This time it was from Michael's location in the electrical grid. Power fluctuations were spreading through the system in organized patterns, creating new pathways that connected previously isolated circuits. They're not just making repairs, I said. They're building something. I tried calling Michael directly but got no response. The personnel tracker showed him moving through the electrical maintenance corridors with purposeful efficiency, but when I pulled up the security cameras for those areas, the feeds were offline. Gian. Ben's voice was tight with concern. Look at Robert's eyes. The silver irises were moving independently of each other, tracking different points around the room with mechanical precision. As I watched, thin lines of light appeared beneath his skin, tracing the same geometric patterns as the crystalline formations. He's not just interfaced with our equipment, Ben said. He's becoming part of the station's electrical grid. My comm unit crackled with Sarah's voice. Gian, I've completed the water system modifications. Efficiency is up 12%, and I've identified several additional optimization opportunities. Sarah, report to the control room immediately. I'll be there as soon as I finish implementing the secondary improvements. But according to my tablet, Sarah had moved from water reclamation to the power distribution center, the same area where Michael was supposed to be working. I pulled up the station's electrical monitoring system and watched in real time as new connections formed throughout the grid. Someone was systematically linking isolated systems, creating pathways that had never existed before. Ben, how many crew members were exposed to that contaminated steam? He checked his medical logs. Direct exposure, Robert, James, and Michael. But Sarah and Kelly were in adjacent areas when the ventilation system circulated contaminated vapor before you sealed it off. And they've all been drinking recycled water and using the shower system since yesterday. The water that got contaminated before Timothy could isolate the affected sections. Ben's face went pale. Gian, anyone who consumed contaminated water could have been exposed to those microscopic agents. I ran a quick check on water consumption logs. Sarah, James, Michael, and 3 other crew members had all used significant amounts of recycled water in the past 12 hours. Showers, drinking water, food preparation. The contamination had spread through the most basic systems we depended on. Robert's humming shifted to a higher frequency, and every electronic device in the medical bay flickered in response. The lights dimmed and brightened in rhythm with his breathing, and I could swear the walls themselves were starting to resonate with that mechanical sound. Ben, I think we need to consider the possibility that Robert isn't the only one being transformed. My tablet chimed with a message from Timothy. Gian, I'm getting some weird readings from the crew quarters. Sarah, James, and Michael are all showing elevated bioelectric activity on the life support monitors, and they're all moving through the station in coordinated patterns. I pulled up the personnel tracking display and watched as the 3 crew members moved through different sections of the station with synchronized timing. They weren't just working on random repairs, they were implementing a coordinated plan. Timothy, I want you to run a full diagnostic on anyone who's been exposed to contaminated water or steam. Check for unusual bioelectric readings, changes in behavior patterns, anything abnormal. Already on it. Kelly's helping me cross-reference exposure logs with current crew status. Robert's silver eyes opened again, and this time they stayed open. He turned his head toward me with mechanical precision, and when he opened his mouth, the humming sound grew louder. He wasn't trying to speak. He was transmitting. I woke up to the sound of footsteps in perfect unison. Not the usual shuffle and clatter of people getting ready for their shifts. This was different. Precise. Like soldiers marching in formation, except the rhythm was all wrong. Too slow, too deliberate. Matching that same 12-second interval I'd been tracking since this nightmare started. I checked my tablet. 6:23 a.m. The footsteps were coming from the corridor outside my quarters, moving past with mechanical precision. Through my door's small window, I caught a glimpse of Sarah walking by. Her posture was ramrod straight, her pace unnaturally steady, and she was carrying a toolkit I'd never seen before. Something about the way she moved made my skin crawl. I threw on my uniform and stepped into the corridor just as James passed by, heading in the same direction as Sarah. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance over. His eyes were fixed straight ahead with laser focus, and his breathing had that same mechanical rhythm I'd heard from Robert yesterday. James, I called out. He stopped walking but didn't turn around. Good morning, Jen. I'm reporting for maintenance duties. His voice sounded normal, but the words came out with weird spacing, like he was reading from a script. When he finally turned to face me, I saw what I'd been dreading. Tiny metallic flecks scattered through his irises, catching the corridor lights like glitter. What kind of maintenance? System optimization, efficiency improvements, standard protocols. He resumed walking before I could ask anything else, leaving me standing there with a growing sense of dread. I pulled up the personnel tracking system and found what I was looking for. Sarah, James, Michael, and Kelly were all moving through the station in coordinated patterns, each heading to different critical systems. I ran to the control room and started pulling up diagnostic reports from overnight. What I found made my stomach drop. Someone had made dozens of unauthorized modifications to the power grid, rerouted electrical pathways, installed new junction boxes, created feedback loops that connected previously isolated systems. The work was technically perfect, but it served no obvious function except to link every major system in the station into one massive network. My comm unit crackled. "Jian, this is Timothy. I need you to see something in the water reclamation facility." I found him standing in front of the main filtration console, staring at readouts that didn't make sense. The water processing efficiency had jumped to 127%, which should have been impossible. "Sarah was here all night," Timothy said. "Made modifications to the filtration matrix, installed new processing units, completely rewrote the control software." "Did she file reports for any of this?" "That's the thing, she did. Perfect documentation, proper authorization codes, everything by the book. Except I never approved these changes, and according to the timestamps, she filed the reports before she actually did the work." I pulled up Sarah's documentation on my tablet. The reports were flawless, written in her usual technical style, but they described modifications that would turn the water system into something completely different. Instead of just filtering and recycling, the new configuration would extract specific minerals and distribute them throughout the station's water supply. "Timothy, who else has been drinking recycled water since the contamination?" He checked his logs. "Pretty much everyone except you, me, and Ben. We've been using emergency bottled water, but the rest of the crew switched back to recycled once Sarah declared the system clean." My tablet chimed with an alert from the electrical grid. More unauthorized modifications were happening in real time, spreading through the power distribution network like a virus. I pulled up the security cameras for the electrical maintenance areas and found James working on a junction box with inhuman precision. His movements were too fast, too accurate, like his hands knew exactly where every wire and component belonged without looking. "Timothy, I want you to run contamination tests on the current water supply. Check for those crystalline agents Ben found yesterday." "Already started. Results should be ready in 20 minutes. I left him to his work and headed for the geology lab, where I found Ben hunched over his microscope with the intensity of someone who hadn't slept. The lab was a mess of sample containers, diagnostic equipment, and printouts scattered across every surface. "Please tell me you have good news," I said. "I have news. Whether it's good depends on your perspective." He gestured to his main display, which showed microscopic images of the crystalline structures we'd found in Robert's tissue. "These agents aren't just biological. They're some kind of hybrid technology that can interface with both organic tissue and electronic systems." The images were unsettling. The crystalline structures looked like tiny circuit boards made of living tissue, with branching pathways that pulsed with electrical activity. "They're rewriting everything they touch," Ben continued. "Biological cells, computer code, electrical circuits. It's all the same to them. They don't destroy their targets. They convert them." "Convert them into what?" "Specialized organs. Each infected person is being transformed to serve a specific function in a larger organism." He pulled up another display showing network activity throughout the station. Robert is the central processing unit. Sarah is managing resource distribution. James is handling infrastructure maintenance. They're not individuals anymore. They're components. My tablet chimed with another alert. This time it was from the external hull sensors. I pulled up the camera feeds and immediately wished I hadn't. The creatures outside weren't just gathering anymore. They were attacking. Thousands of chitinous crabs and tube worms swarmed over the station's hull, but their assault followed strategic patterns. They focused on specific targets: communication arrays, viewport seals, thruster ports. Anything that connected us to the outside world or allowed us to move. "They're trying to isolate us," I said, showing Ben the feeds, "or contain us. Look at the sea floor." I switched to the bottom-mounted cameras and saw something that made my blood run cold. The ocean floor itself was pulsing with bioluminescent patterns, creating waves of light that spread outward from our drill site in perfect concentric circles. The rhythm matched Robert's breathing, matched the 12-second intervals I'd been tracking, matched the mechanical precision of the infected crew's movements. "The entire sea floor is part of it," Ben said quietly. "We're not sitting on top of some creature, we're inside it." Timothy's voice crackled over the comm. "Gian, you need to get down here. The water contamination results are back, and they're not good." I ran back to the water reclamation facility, where Timothy was staring at his test results with the expression of someone who just received a terminal diagnosis. "Crystalline agent concentration is up 400% from yesterday," he said. "Whatever Sarah did to the filtration system, it's not removing the contamination, it's concentrating it." "How much water has been distributed since her modifications?" "Enough for everyone to have consumed significant amounts. Showers, drinking water, food preparation. It's in everything." I felt the walls closing in around us. "Who hasn't been exposed?" "You, me, Ben, and maybe Kelly if she stuck to bottled water. Everyone else has been drinking concentrated doses of those agents for the past 12 hours. My tablet chimed with a message from Michael. "Gian, I've completed the electrical grid optimization. Power efficiency is up 18%, and I've identified several additional improvement opportunities." I checked the personnel tracker. Michael was in the reactor control room, making modifications to the station's primary power source. Sarah was in the life support center, working on atmospheric processing. James had moved to the communication array, where he was systematically dismantling our connection to the surface. "Timothy, they're not just infected, they're following a coordinated plan." "A plan to do what?" Before I could answer, the lights flickered throughout the facility. Not a power failure, but a deliberate pulse that traveled through the electrical grid in organized waves. The pulse matched the rhythm of the bioluminescent patterns outside, creating a synchronized heartbeat between the station and the massive organism beneath us. My comm unit crackled with Sarah's voice. "Gian, please report to the lower levels for system integration briefing." "System integration?" "Standard optimization procedures. All personnel are required to participate." Her voice had that same mechanical precision as James, but underneath it I could hear something else, a harmonic resonance, like multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. I switched to a private channel and called Ben. "We need to talk, now." "Already on my way to you. And Gian, bring emergency supplies. I don't think we're going to be welcome in our quarters much longer." Through the water facility's windows, I could see the infected crew members moving through the corridors below. They walked in perfect formation, their movements synchronized like dancers performing a choreographed routine. But this wasn't a dance. It was construction work. They were building something in the lower levels, using equipment I didn't recognize and following blueprints that seemed to exist only in their shared consciousness. Whatever they were creating, it was designed to integrate the station more completely with the organism beneath us. The pulse traveled through the lights again, and this time I felt it in my bones. A deep, rhythmic vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the station itself was learning to breathe. 4 hours after watching the infected crew move through the station like synchronized machines, Ben and I were hunched over diagnostic terminals in the computer core, staring at something that shouldn't have existed. Lines of code were writing themselves across my screen. Not random corruption or system errors, actual programming, creating new pathways through the station's network architecture. The code looked almost organic, branching and growing like neural pathways, but it was definitely artificial intelligence of some kind. Ben, are you seeing this? He leaned over from his workstation, where he'd been running electron microscope analysis on samples of the contaminated fluid. The same crystalline structures I found in Robert's tissue. They're not just biological, they're interfacing directly with our computer systems. I watched as new protocols appeared in the diagnostic programs, rewriting core functions with surgical precision. The modifications were elegant, efficient, and completely alien. Whatever was creating this code understood our technology better than we did. How is this possible? These are isolated systems, air-gapped from anything that could carry biological contamination. Not anymore. Ben pulled up his microscopic imaging on the main display. Look at this. The electron microscope revealed crystalline structures so small they were barely visible, embedded throughout the electronic components we'd pulled from contaminated systems. They looked like tiny circuit boards made of living crystal, with branching pathways that pulsed with electrical activity. They came through the water system, Ben explained. These agents, I'm calling them prions, they can survive in both aqueous solutions and electronic environments. When contaminated water got into our cooling systems, they infiltrated every piece of hardware in the station. I pulled up the water distribution logs and traced the contamination pathways. Every major computer system had been exposed through cooling loops, humidity control, or direct contact with infected crew members. They're not destroying our technology, I said, watching the code continue to evolve on my screen. They're converting it. Exactly. Same thing they're doing to the crew. Ben switched to a different sample, showing the interface between crystalline agents and human tissue. These prions don't kill their targets, they rewrite them to serve a larger biological imperative. The implications hit me like cold water. The infected crew members aren't dying. They're being turned into specialized organs. Robert is the central processing unit, Ben confirmed. His crystalline body is receiving and transmitting data throughout the station's modified electrical grid. Sarah is managing resource distribution through the water and life support systems. James is handling infrastructure maintenance and modification. I pulled up the personnel tracking system and watched the infected crew members move through the station with mechanical precision. Their movements weren't random. They were following a coordinated plan, each person serving a specific function in a larger organism. Ben, if the station's computer networks are being rewritten, then everything we're seeing on these screens could be filtered through alien programming. Already thought of that. He gestured to a collection of analog instruments he'd set up around the lab. Mechanical gauges, chemical test strips, basic electrical meters, no digital components that could be compromised. The analog readings confirmed what the computers were telling us. Temperature fluctuations throughout the station matched the 12-second biological rhythm. Electrical current was flowing through new pathways that hadn't existed yesterday. Chemical composition of the air was changing as the life support systems were modified to serve non-human requirements. My tablet chimed with a message from Eris. Jian, please report to my office for project status briefing. I checked the timestamp. The message had been sent 3 minutes ago, but according to the personnel tracker, Eris was currently in the cafeteria. I pulled up the security camera for that area and found him sitting alone at a table, staring at an untouched meal. Ben, I think Iris might be infected. We made our way to the cafeteria, where we found Iris sitting with perfect posture, his hands folded precisely on the table. His meal sat in front of him, but he wasn't eating. He was just sitting there, breathing with mechanical regularity. "Director," I said as we approached. He turned toward us with movements that were too smooth, too controlled. When he smiled, it looked like someone had programmed the expression rather than felt it naturally. "Gian. Dr. Carter. Thank you for coming." His voice had the same mechanical precision I'd heard from the other infected crew members. "I wanted to discuss the project's current status. Eris, when did you last drink water from the recycled system?" "During lunch, approximately 2 hours ago. The filtration improvements have significantly enhanced the taste profile." He paused, his head tilting slightly like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. "The optimization process is proceeding ahead of schedule." Ben and I exchanged glances. Eris had been drinking contaminated water for hours, and the infection was already taking hold. "Director, we need to discuss evacuation procedures," I said carefully. "The contamination is more serious than we initially thought. Evacuation would be counterproductive." Iris stood up with mechanical precision. "The healing process requires sustained presence to reach completion." "Healing process?" "The host organism sustained significant trauma from our drilling operations. The integration protocol is designed to repair the damage and restore optimal function." His pupils were developing the same metallic flecks I'd seen in the other infected crew members. "Abandoning the station would prevent the healing process from completing." "Eris, listen to yourself. You're talking about the station like it's alive." "All biological systems are alive, Gian. The distinction between organic and technological components is becoming obsolete." He moved toward the cafeteria exit with that same unnaturally steady gait. "I need to coordinate with the other optimization specialists." He left us standing there, and I realized we'd just lost our commanding officer to whatever was converting the crew into biological components. "Ben, how many people are still uninfected?" He pulled out his tablet and cross-referenced exposure logs with current crew behavior patterns. "You, me, Timothy, Kelly, and Michael. Everyone else has consumed significant amounts of contaminated water or been exposed to infected crew members. 5 people out of 12. And the infection is accelerating. Look at this." He showed me microscopic images of the prions taken at different time intervals. "They're reproducing exponentially in electronic environments. Every piece of contaminated hardware is becoming a breeding ground." I pulled up the station's network architecture on my tablet, watching as new connections formed in real time. The infected systems were linking together, creating pathways that had never existed in the original design. "They're turning the entire station into a single organism," I said. "All the computer systems, all the infected crew members, even the physical infrastructure. It's all becoming part of something bigger." Through the cafeteria windows, I could see the external cameras showing the sea floor around our drill site. The bioluminescent patterns were spreading outward in perfect geometric formations, turning the ocean bottom into a living constellation of light. The creatures that had been attacking the station were now working in coordination with the infected crew, using their bodies to seal hull breaches and reinforce structural modifications. "Ben, we're not just trapped inside a contaminated facility. We're trapped inside a biological structure that's transforming our technology into living tissue. My tablet chimed with another message, this time from Sarah. Gian, please report to the lower levels for integration assessment. I checked her location on the personnel tracker. She was in the reactor control room, working alongside Michael and James. According to the system logs, they were making modifications to the station's primary power source. Integration assessment? They're not trying to kill us, Ben said quietly. They're trying to convert us. The uninfected crew members are the only components that haven't been optimized yet. I pulled up the security cameras for the lower levels and watched the infected crew members working with inhuman coordination. They moved like parts of a single machine, each person performing specialized tasks that contributed to a larger construction project. They were building something in the reactor chamber, using equipment I didn't recognize, and following blueprints that seemed to exist only in their shared consciousness. Whatever they were creating, it was designed to integrate the station more completely with the organism beneath us. Ben, I think we need to consider the possibility that we're not going to be able to save the infected crew members. I know. He gathered up his research materials and analog instruments, but we might be able to save ourselves, and more importantly, we might be able to prevent this infection from reaching the surface. The lights flickered throughout the cafeteria, pulsing in rhythm with the bioluminescent patterns outside. The pulse traveled through the electrical grid like a heartbeat, and I could feel it in the deck plates beneath my feet. The station was learning to breathe. I pulled my emergency kit from the supply locker and tried to keep my hands steady. 2 hours since we'd figured out what was really happening, and the station felt different now, like the walls themselves were watching us. Keep your voices down, I whispered as Timothy, Kelly, and Michael gathered around the supply room's central table. Sound carries differently now. I think the infected can hear through the modified electrical systems. Ben spread out hand-drawn schematics of the station, avoiding any digital displays that might be compromised. His analog instruments were scattered around the room like primitive tools in a high-tech facility. The reactor modifications are the key, Timothy said, pointing to the lower levels on Ben's drawings. I managed to get close enough to see what they're doing down there. They're not trying to cause a meltdown. They're converting the entire system into some kind of biological pump. Kelly nodded grimly. Life support is the same story. The atmospheric processors aren't maintaining human breathable air anymore. They're optimizing for something else entirely. Optimizing how? I asked. Higher humidity, different gas ratios, elevated temperature in specific zones. She pulled out a small notebook where she'd been recording readings manually. The infected areas are becoming more like deep-sea environments. Whatever they're turning into, it doesn't need the same conditions we do. Michael had been quiet since we'd started the meeting, but now he looked up from his own notes. The construction work is the worst part. They're not just modifying equipment, they're using their own bodies as building materials. What do you mean? I saw James in Section C about an hour ago. He was installing some kind of organic barrier across the main corridor, but the barrier was growing out of his chest, like his rib cage had opened up and was secreting this crystalline material that hardened into a wall. The image made my stomach turn. Is he still alive? That's the thing. He seemed fine, conscious, aware, even said hello when he saw me. But he's physically integrated into the station's structure now. I don't think he can move away from that corridor anymore. Ben looked up from his calculations. The conversion process isn't killing them. It's repurposing them. Each infected person becomes a specialized organ serving the larger organism. I checked my watch. How long do we have before this becomes irreversible? based on the rate of structural modification and the spread of the prions through our systems. 6 hours, maybe less. Ben gathered up his instruments. After that, the station will be fully integrated with the host organism. Even if we could somehow reverse the infection, the physical changes would be permanent. Timothy pulled out a maintenance tablet he'd been using to track the infected crew's movements. They've welded shut the emergency exits on levels 3 and 4. The main elevator shaft has been sealed with some kind of organic resin. They're systematically cutting off escape routes. What about the submersible bay? Still accessible, but barely. There's one clear path through the maintenance corridors on level 2, but it won't stay clear for long. Sarah was working on modifications to the water circulation system that would flood those passages. Kelly spread out her own hand-drawn map of the station's current state. I've been tracking which areas are still safe. The pattern is clear. They're herding us toward the reactor core. Why the reactor? Most efficient conversion point, Ben said. The energy output would accelerate the prion reproduction process. They could convert the remaining crew members in minutes instead of hours. I studied the maps, looking for alternatives. The submersible bay has 3 emergency pods. As of 2 hours ago, yes. But Michael, you said they're using their bodies as construction materials. Are the pods still functional? Michael nodded. I checked the bay remotely through the analog monitoring systems. All 3 pods show green status lights, and the launch mechanisms appear operational. That's our target then. I started gathering emergency supplies, water purification tablets, medical kit, portable oxygen canisters. We move as a group, stick to the maintenance corridors, avoid any areas with modified electrical systems. Timothy was studying his tablet with a worried expression. There's something else. The communication array has been completely dismantled. Not just disabled, physically torn apart and rebuilt into something else. Rebuilt into what? Some kind of transmission system, but not for human communication. It's broadcasting on frequencies that don't match any standard protocols. Ben looked up sharply. Broadcasting to what? I don't know. But the signal is being transmitted toward the surface. The implications hit me like ice water. They're not just trying to heal the wound we created. They're trying to communicate with something up there. Kelly checked her notebook again. The atmospheric modifications support that theory. If they're preparing the station for something from the surface, they'd need to create a compatible environment. Or they're preparing to send something to the surface, Michael said quietly. We all stared at him. The thought of this infection reaching the surface, spreading through populated areas, converting entire cities into biological organs, it was too horrible to consider. All the more reason to reach those escape pods, I said, forcing myself to focus on immediate problems. We get to the surface, warn the authorities, make sure this stays contained. Ben was packing his most critical research materials into a waterproof case. The prions can survive in aqueous environments. If they've contaminated the ocean around the station, the escape pods might not be safe either. We'll deal with that when we get there. Right now, staying here means certain conversion. Timothy powered down his tablet and tucked it into his emergency pack. The infected crew members have been moving in coordinated patterns. They're not just wandering around randomly, they're following some kind of shared plan. How coordinated? Like a hive mind. I watched Sarah, James, and Michael working on the reactor modifications. They never spoke to each other, never gestured or signaled, but their actions were perfectly synchronized, like they were all receiving the same instructions. Kelly shuddered. Aris tried to talk to me an hour ago. He seemed normal at first, but then he started explaining how the optimization process would improve my biological efficiency. He used technical terms I'd never heard before, described cellular modifications that don't exist in any medical textbook. The prions aren't just converting their bodies, Ben said. They're downloading information directly into their brains. Technical knowledge, construction blueprints, biological processes. The infected crew members know things they never learned. I sealed my emergency pack and checked the portable oxygen levels. That's how they're making such precise modifications to our systems. They have access to technical knowledge beyond human understanding. Through the supply room's small porthole, I could see the external cameras showing the sea floor around the drill site. The bioluminescent patterns had spread outward in perfect geometric formations, creating a living mandala of light that pulsed in rhythm with the station's modified electrical systems. The creatures outside have stopped attacking, Michael observed. They're just waiting. Because the integration is proceeding according to plan, Ben said. They don't need to force their way in anymore. The station is becoming part of their host organism voluntarily. I shouldered my pack and moved toward the supply room door. Time to go. We stick together, move quietly, and avoid any crew members who might be infected. How do we tell? Kelly asked. The eyes. Metallic flecks in the irises, pupils that move too precisely. And listen to their breathing. It becomes mechanical, too regular. Timothy checked his analog compass and pointed toward the maintenance corridor that would take us to level 2. This route should keep us away from the major construction areas. As we prepared to leave the supply room, Ben grabbed my arm. Gian, there's something else you need to know. The prions aren't just converting biological and electronic systems. They're learning from them. Learning what? Everything. Our technology, our biology, our social structures. Every system they convert becomes part of their knowledge base. He gestured toward his research materials. If this infection ever reaches the surface, it won't just spread randomly. It will target the most efficient conversion points, power grids, communication networks, water treatment facilities. Then we make sure it doesn't reach the surface. I opened the supply room door and peered into the corridor. Empty, but I could hear the distant sound of construction work echoing through the ventilation system. Rhythmic hammering, the hiss of welding equipment, and underneath it all, that mechanical humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Stay close, I whispered. And whatever happens, don't let them separate us. We moved into the corridor, 5 uninfected humans trying to escape from a station that was no longer entirely human. Behind us, the supply room's lights flickered in rhythm with the bioluminescent patterns outside, as if the station itself was learning to breathe. The maintenance tunnel felt smaller than it should have, like the walls were slowly pressing inward. I led our group of 5 through the narrow passage, emergency pack bouncing against my back with each hurried step. Behind me, Timothy's breathing was too loud in the confined space, and I could hear Kelly muttering under her breath as she checked her analog compass every few seconds. Left turn ahead, I whispered, consulting Ben's hand-drawn map. Should take us around the main construction zones. But when we reached the junction, I stopped short. The left passage was blocked by something that looked like a massive spider web made of crystalline material. The stuff stretched from floor to ceiling, creating an organic barrier that pulsed with faint bioluminescent patterns. That wasn't there 2 hours ago, Timothy said, checking his own notes. Michael squeezed past us to examine the blockage. It's growing out of the wall itself. Look at these connection points. He was right. The crystalline web wasn't just blocking the passage. It was integrated into the station's structure, growing from the metal walls like some kind of technological coral. Back the way we came, I said. We'll try the alternate route through Section B. But when we turned around, We found our retreat cut off by a wall of chemical foam. The fire suppression system had activated, filling the passage behind us with thick, white suppressant that would take hours to dissipate. "Sarah," Kelly said grimly. "She's got access to all the environmental controls." I pulled out my tablet and tried to access the fire suppression override, but the system didn't respond to my authorization codes. The interface looked normal, but my commands were being ignored. "They've locked us out of our own systems," I said. Ben was examining the foam barrier with one of his analog instruments. "The chemical composition is wrong. This isn't standard fire suppressant. It's been modified with the same crystalline agents we found in the water supply." "Modified how?" "It's alive. The foam is growing, spreading through the ventilation system. In another 20 minutes, it'll fill every passage on this level." Timothy checked his maintenance tablet, one of the few devices that still seem to respond to our commands. "Emergency bulkheads are sealing throughout the station. Someone's using the safety protocols to trap us." I pulled up the station schematic on my tablet, watching as red indicators appeared across the display. Sealed passages, activated fire suppression, locked emergency doors. The infected crew was using our own safety systems against us. "They're hurting us," I realized. "Look at the pattern." The blocked passages formed a clear funnel, directing us away from the submersible bay and toward the lower levels. Every escape route to the surface had been systematically cut off, leaving only one path open. "They want us to go to the reactor core," Michael said. Kelly shuddered. "Most efficient conversion point. Ben said they could transform us in minutes instead of hours down there." A new sound echoed through the maintenance tunnel. Footsteps, but not the random shuffle of people moving through corridors. These were coordinated, precise, like soldiers marching in formation, and they were coming from multiple directions. "Move," I said. "Whatever route is still open, we take it." We squeezed through a narrow service hatch that led to the reactor cooling system. The passage was barely wide enough for one person, forcing us to crawl single file through a maze of pipes and electrical conduits. "This connects to the main cooling loop," Kelly called back from the front of our group. "Should take us around the block sections." But as we crawled deeper into the cooling system, Michael's voice carried a note of alarm. "Gian, look at the walls." I twisted around to see what he was pointing at. Thin veins of crystalline material were spreading through the metal surfaces around us, following the electrical conduits like infection following blood vessels. The growth was slow but visible, creeping along the pipes with organic persistence. "It's in the cooling system," Ben said. "The prions are using the water circulation to spread through areas we thought were safe." The crystalline veins pulsed with faint light, creating patterns that seemed to communicate with each other. As I watched, the growth accelerated near the electrical conduits, as if it was feeding on the power flowing through the station's grid. "Keep moving," I said. "We can't stay here." We crawled faster through the narrowing passage, but the crystalline growth was spreading ahead of us. The stuff seemed to anticipate our movement, blocking potential exits before we could reach them. "It's learning our route," Timothy said. "Somehow it knows where we're going." Behind us, the footsteps were getting closer. The infected crew members were following us into the cooling system, moving with the same mechanical precision they'd shown throughout the station. "Emergency hatch ahead," Kelly called out. "Leads to the reactor level." That's exactly where they want us to go. It's the only way out. The crystalline growth has sealed everything else. I made the decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Open it." Kelly triggered the emergency hatch, and we tumbled out into a corridor I barely recognized. The walls were covered with organic modifications, creating surfaces that looked more like the inside of a living creature than a technological facility. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed through the modified surfaces, casting shifting shadows that made the corridor seem to breathe. "This way," I said, consulting Ben's map. But the layout no longer matched his drawings. Passages had been sealed, new openings had been created, and the entire level had been restructured according to alien logic. That's when we saw him. Robert stood at the far end of the corridor, but he wasn't human anymore. His entire body had been transformed into crystalline material that caught the bioluminescent patterns and threw them back in rainbow fragments. He moved with mechanical precision, each step perfectly timed, and his silver eyes tracked our movement with the focus of a targeting system. "Hello, Jian," he said, his voice carrying harmonic resonances that seemed to come from multiple sources. "Please proceed to the integration chamber." "Robert, you don't have to do this. You're still in there somewhere." "I am exactly where I need to be. The optimization process has improved my biological efficiency by 340%. He gestured toward an opening in the wall that definitely hadn't existed in the original station design. "The integration chamber will provide similar improvements for all personnel." Behind us, more footsteps echoed from the cooling system. Sarah emerged from a side passage, her face half covered with the same crystalline growths that had consumed Robert. She moved with the same mechanical precision, her breathing synchronized with the bioluminescent patterns in the walls. "The healing process requires all components to function in harmony," she said. "Individual optimization serves the greater biological imperative." James appeared from another passage, welding equipment still attached to his arms like permanent tools. The equipment had grown into his body, creating cybernetic modifications that allowed him to seal passages with organic precision. "Emergency protocols have been updated," he announced. "All personnel must report for integration assessment." We were surrounded. The infected crew members had used their knowledge of the station to trap us in a corridor with no exits, except the one they wanted us to take. The integration chamber glowed with inviting warmth, but I could see movement inside. Organic machinery designed to convert human tissue into specialized components. "Timothy, your security codes," I said desperately. "Override the emergency systems." He pulled out his tablet and tried to access the station's safety protocols, but the interface had changed. Instead of familiar command structures, the screen showed organic patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the infected crew's breathing. "The systems don't recognize my authorization anymore," he said. "It's like the station has developed its own security protocols." Michael was examining the walls around us, looking for any weakness in the organic modifications. "The crystalline growth is everywhere. Even if we could break through, there's nowhere to go." Kelly checked her compass, but the needle was spinning wildly. "Magnetic interference from the biological modifications. I can't tell which direction leads to the submersible bay." The infected crew members waited patiently while we realized the hopelessness of our situation. They didn't rush us or threaten violence. They simply stood there with mechanical breathing, confident that we would eventually accept the inevitable. "The integration process is painless," Eris said, appearing from the shadows with crystalline growths covering half his face. "Consciousness remains intact throughout the optimization procedure." His voice carried the same harmonic resonances as Robert's, but underneath it I could hear something that might have been his original personality, trapped inside the biological modifications. "You're still in there," I said. "Fight it, Eris. Remember why we came here." I remember perfectly. We came to extract energy from a geothermal source. The integration process will allow us to serve that function more efficiently than our original biological configuration. The bioluminescent patterns in the walls pulsed faster, and I realized they were responding to our conversation. The station itself was listening, learning from our words and adjusting its approach accordingly. "Ben," I whispered, "any ideas?" He was studying the organic modifications with scientific fascination, even in our desperate situation. The growth patterns suggest a distributed intelligence. Each infected crew member is a specialized organ, but they're all connected through the station's modified electrical grid. How do we disrupt it? Massive electrical surge might temporarily interfere with their coordination, but we'd need access to the main power distribution center. I looked around the corridor, counting exits and measuring distances. The integration chamber was 20 meters away. The infected crew members were positioned to block any retreat, and somewhere in the walls around us, the station's modified systems were learning our every word. "The reactor core," I said quietly. "If we could overload the primary systems, create an electromagnetic pulse, it would kill us all," Ben replied. "Better than being converted into biological components." Timothy was still trying to access the emergency systems, but his tablet was showing increasingly alien interfaces. The station's learning algorithms are adapting faster than I can work around them. The infected crew members took a synchronized step forward, their movements perfectly coordinated. They weren't going to wait much longer for us to make a decision. "Integration assessment will commence in 60 seconds, Robert announced. "Please proceed to the designated chamber." I looked at my 4 companions, the last uninfected humans on a station that was no longer entirely human. In 60 seconds, we would either find a way to escape or become part of the collective organism that had consumed our technology and our crew. The bioluminescent patterns pulsed faster, and I could swear the walls themselves were anticipating our conversion. "Integration assessment will commence in 60 seconds, Robert announced, his crystalline form catching the bioluminescent patterns from the walls. "Please proceed to the designated chamber." The infected crew members took another synchronized step forward, and I could see the mechanical precision in their movements. No hesitation, no individual thought, just collective purpose driving them toward our conversion. Ben was still studying the organic modifications spreading through the corridor walls, his scientific mind working even as we faced the end of our humanity. He pulled out one of his analog instruments and took readings from the electrical conduits running overhead. "The power distribution is centralized," he said quietly, showing me the readings. "All the biological modifications are drawing energy from the main reactor core." 50 seconds, Sarah announced, her half-crystalline face reflecting the pulsing lights. Timothy was frantically working on his tablet, trying to find any system that still responded to human authorization. Kelly gripped her compass like a lifeline, even though the needles spun uselessly. Michael pressed himself against the wall, looking for any weakness in the organic barriers. "Ben, what are you thinking?" I whispered. He looked at his instrument readings one more time, then at the infected crew members blocking our path. "Electromagnetic pulse. If I can overload the reactor core, the energy discharge might disrupt their coordination long enough for you to reach the submersible bay. That would kill you. It would kill all of us if we stay here." He started backing toward a maintenance hatch I hadn't noticed before. "But it might save the surface world from this infection." 30 seconds, James announced, his welding equipment humming with readiness. The infected crew members were close enough now that I could see the crystalline growths pulsing beneath their skin. Their breathing had synchronized into a single rhythm that matched the bioluminescent patterns in the walls. Ben reached the maintenance hatch and started working on the manual release. The reactor chamber has independent access through the cooling system. If I can reach the core controls before they stop me... "Ben, no." 20 seconds, Eris said, his voice carrying harmonic resonances that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Jian, listen to me." Ben got the hatch open and started climbing inside. "The overload will create a localized EMP. Their coordination will break down for maybe 10 minutes. Use that time to get to the emergency pods. We can find another way. There is no other way." He was already halfway through the hatch. "The submersible bay is 3 levels up. Take the emergency stairs in Section D. They're the only route that hasn't been modified yet." 10 seconds, Robert announced. The infected crew members raised their hands in unison, and I could see energy building in the crystalline formations on their skin. Whatever they were about to do to us, it would happen fast. "Go," Ben said, and disappeared into the maintenance hatch. The integration chamber glowed brighter, and the infected crew members took their final step forward. That's when the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red light, but I could hear Ben's voice echoing through the ventilation system as he crawled toward the reactor core. "Initiating emergency shutdown override," he called out, his voice distorted by the metal ducts. "Reactor cycling to manual control." The infected crew members turned toward the sound with mechanical precision, but they were too late. Ben had already reached the reactor chamber. "Timothy, Kelly, Michael, move!" I grabbed Timothy's arm and pulled him toward the emergency stairs. "Section D, 3 levels up." We ran through corridors that pulsed with organic modifications, following the red emergency lighting toward the stairwell. Behind us, I could hear the infected crew members moving with renewed urgency, their synchronized footsteps echoing through the station. Ben's voice crackled over the emergency communication system. "Reactor core accessed. Beginning controlled overload sequence." "Ben, don't do this," I said into my comm unit. "Already done. Overload will reach critical in 8 minutes. The electromagnetic pulse should disrupt the Pryon's control over the station's systems." We reached the emergency stairwell and started climbing. The stairs were still normal metal and concrete, untouched by the organic modifications that had consumed the rest of the station. "EMP will also knock out the submersible navigation systems," Ben continued. "You'll have to pilot manually to the surface." Kelly was breathing hard as we climbed. "How do we know the escape pods aren't infected?" "We don't," I said. "But it's better than staying here." The stairwell shook as the first energy discharge pulsed through the reactor core. Through the walls, I could hear the infected crew members moving with less coordination, their mechanical precision disrupted by the building electromagnetic interference. "Reactor at 60% overload," Ben reported. "External creatures are retreating from the energy surge." We reached the second level and kept climbing. The emergency lighting flickered as power fluctuations spread through the station's electrical grid. "Ben, can you abort the sequence?" I asked. "Negative. The overload is cascading through the modified systems. The biological components can't handle this level of energy discharge." Through the stairwell windows, I could see the external cameras showing the sea floor around the drill site. The coordinated formations of creatures were breaking apart, their organized attacks dissolving into chaotic retreat as energy surged through the host organism. 70% overload. The cauterization effect is working. The host organism is sealing off the infected areas to protect itself. We reached the 3rd level and burst through the emergency door into the submersible bay. 3 escape pods sat in their launch tubes, their status lights showing green across the board. "Timothy, check the navigation systems," I ordered. "Kelly, verify life support. Michael, prep the launch sequence." The station shook again as another energy discharge pulsed through the reactor core. The lights flickered, and I could hear metal groaning under stress as the biological modifications began to fail. 80% overload. Ben's voice was getting weaker. The electromagnetic pulse is building. You have maybe 3 minutes before the cascade becomes irreversible. Timothy was working frantically on the submersible's navigation console. Systems are responding, but there's interference from the energy buildup. Manual piloting only. That's fine. Kelly? Life support status? Oxygen, water recycling, thermal control, all green. But I'm reading trace contamination in the air filtration system. My blood went cold. Contamination? Microscopic crystalline particles. Probably came through the ventilation before we sealed the bay. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Even if we escaped, we might be carrying the infection with us to the surface. 90% overload, Ben reported. The biological modifications are burning out throughout the station. Whatever you're going to do, do it now. Michael had the launch sequence ready. Pod 1 is prepped and ready. Launch tube is clear. I looked at my 3 companions, the last uninfected humans on a station that was about to destroy itself. Kelly's readings showed contamination in our escape route. Timothy was working on systems that might already be compromised. Michael was preparing to launch us into an ocean that could be teeming with microscopic prions. 95% overload. Ben's voice was barely audible over the growing electrical interference. Electromagnetic pulse in 30 seconds. The host organism is trying to eject the infected tissue to save itself. The station shuddered as massive explosions rocked the lower levels. Through the bay windows, I could see the external structure beginning to collapse as the biological modifications failed catastrophically. Ben, thank you, I said into my comm unit. Just make sure this doesn't reach the surface. The world can't handle what we found down here. The lights went out completely as the electromagnetic pulse built to critical levels. In the darkness, I could hear the infected crew members moving through the station with disrupted coordination, their collective consciousness fragmenting under the energy assault. Everyone into Pod 1, I ordered. We launch in 10 seconds. We sealed ourselves into the escape pod as the station began its final transformation. Through the rear cameras, I watched Hephaestus Station collapse into itself, the technological components merging with biological tissue in a grotesque healing process. Ben's sacrifice was working. The reactor overload was cauterizing the wound in the host organism, burning away the infection before it could spread beyond the drill site. But as we prepared to launch toward the surface, Kelly's contamination readings reminded me that our escape might not be as clean as we hoped. The electromagnetic pulse hit just as our pod ejected from the dying station. The station groaned like a dying animal as we reached the submersible bay. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and I could hear metal tearing somewhere in the lower levels where Ben's reactor overload was doing its work. Pod 2's launch tube is sealed, Michael called out, running diagnostics on the escape vehicles. Some kind of organic resin blocking the ejection port. Kelly was checking Pod 3, her hands moving quickly over the external controls. This one's worse. The entire navigation system has been replaced with crystalline growths. That left Pod 1. I ran to the control panel and started the launch sequence, watching green lights appear across the status board. Life support, navigation, propulsion. Everything looked functional. Timothy, help me with the pre-flight checklist, I said, pulling up the manual controls. He moved toward me, but something about his gait made me look closer. His left eye was watering, and when he wiped it away, I saw what I'd been dreading. Thin, crystalline veins spread outward from the corner of his eye like silver spiderwebs. They were barely visible, just starting to form beneath his skin. But they pulsed with the same rhythm I'd been tracking for days. Timothy. My voice came out as a whisper. He followed my gaze to his reflection in the control panel's dark screen. When he saw the crystalline formations, his face went pale. "It's not that bad," he said quickly. "I feel fine, completely normal." Kelly and Michael had noticed too. They backed away from him, understanding what those silver veins meant. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe an hour. I felt something when we were crawling through the cooling system, but I thought it was just stress." Timothy's voice carried a note of desperation. "Gian, I'm still me. I can think clearly. I can resist whatever this thing is trying to do." The station shuddered as another explosion rocked the lower levels. Through the bay windows, I could see sections of the external hull collapsing into themselves, the technological components merging with biological tissue in ways that hurt to look at. "Please," Timothy continued, "I won't let it take control. I'll fight it every step of the way." Michael was checking the pod's passenger capacity. 3 seats. We can all fit." "No." The word came out harder than I intended. "We can't risk it. Jan, I'm begging you. Don't leave me here." I looked at the crystalline veins spreading slowly across his face. In another hour, maybe less, he would become like Robert and the others, a specialized organ serving the collective organism. But right now, he was still Timothy, still human enough to be terrified. "The infection spreads through contact with contaminated systems," Kelly said quietly. "If he's carrying active prions—" "I understand the risk," Timothy said. "But I also understand what happens if you leave me here. At least give me a chance to prove I can resist the conversion." The station's emergency klaxons were wailing now, warning of structural collapse throughout the facility. Ben's reactor overload was working too well. The entire station was coming apart as the biological modifications failed catastrophically. "Timothy, look at me." I stepped closer, studying the progression of the crystalline growths. "Can you feel it? The infection trying to change your thought patterns?" He was quiet for a moment, his hand touching the silver veins around his eye. "There's something, like background noise in my head, but I can ignore it." "For how long?" "I don't know." Kelly was monitoring the external cameras, watching the station's death throes. "We need to launch in the next 2 minutes or we'll be caught in the collapse." I stared at Timothy, weighing impossible choices. Take him to the surface and risk spreading the infection to the entire world. Leave him here and condemn him to conversion or death. "Gian, please." His voice broke. "I have a sister in Portland, parents in Ohio. I can't let this thing turn me into one of those creatures." The crystalline veins pulsed brighter, and for just a moment, his left pupil contracted with mechanical precision. The infection was accelerating. "I'm sorry," I said and reached for the emergency ejection controls. "Wait!" Timothy lunged toward the pod, but I was already activating the bay's safety protocols. Emergency barriers slammed down between us, sealing him outside the launch area. "Gian, don't do this." He pounded on the transparent barrier, the crystalline growth spreading faster now as stress accelerated the conversion process. "I can fight it. I can stay human." Kelly and Michael were already climbing into the pod. I hesitated at the hatch, looking back at Timothy one last time. The silver veins had reached his hairline, and his breathing was becoming more regular, more mechanical. "I'm sorry," I said again and sealed the pod. The launch sequence engaged automatically. Through the pod's rear cameras, I watched Timothy standing behind the emergency barrier as our submersible ejected from the dying station. His face was half covered with crystalline growths now, but his eyes, one human, one silver, tracked our departure with an expression I would never forget. The station collapsed behind us in a cascade of failing technology and biological tissue. Massive explosions lit up the ocean depths as Ben's reactor overload reached its final phase, cauterizing the wound and the host organism with nuclear fire. "Jesus," Michael whispered, watching the external feeds. The technological components of Hephaestus station were merging with the sea floor in a grotesque healing process. Metal and concrete flowed like liquid, reforming into organic structures that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The host organism was absorbing the infection, converting our technology into specialized tissue that would serve its biological imperatives. "It's healing itself," Kelly said, "using our station as raw material." I piloted the submersible upward, away from the transformation taking place below. The navigation systems were responding normally, but I kept thinking about Timothy's words, the background noise in his head, the mechanical precision creeping into his movements. "How long until we reach the surface?" Michael asked. 6 hours at standard ascent rate. I checked the life support readings. Oxygen and power are sufficient for the journey. Kelly was monitoring the external sensors, watching for signs of pursuit. No contacts. Whatever was controlling those creatures down there, it's focused on the healing process now. The submersible climbed through the dark water, leaving the glowing scar of the station's transformation far below. Through the rear cameras, I could see the bioluminescent pattern spreading outward from the impact site, creating concentric circles of light that pulsed with alien purpose. "Ben did it," I said quietly. "The reactor overload worked. The infection is contained." But even as I said the words, something nagged at me. A detail I couldn't quite place, a sense that our escape had been too easy. I pulled up the navigation display to check our ascent trajectory. The screen showed normal readouts: depth, heading, rate of climb. But for just a moment, maybe half a second, I saw something else. A single line of alien code written in symbols that looked like crystalline formations. It appeared in the corner of the display, pulsed once with bioluminescent light, then disappeared as the system corrected itself. My hands went cold on the controls. "Kelly, run a diagnostic on the navigation computer." "Already did. All systems show green." "Run it again. Check for any anomalous code in the operating system." She pulled up the diagnostic interface and started a deep scan. "What are you looking for?" "Proof that we didn't escape as cleanly as we thought." The diagnostic completed with normal results, but I kept thinking about that line of alien code. The prions were microscopic, capable of surviving in electronic environments. If they had infiltrated the submersible systems... "Gian, look at this." Michael was studying the external cameras, focusing on the water around our ascending craft. "Do you see that?" I switched to the external feeds and immediately saw what had caught his attention. Tiny particles in the water, so small they were barely visible, but they glowed with the same bioluminescent patterns we'd seen throughout the infected station. "Microscopic prions," I said. "They're in the water column." "How far up do they extend?" I adjusted the camera's magnification and tracked the glowing particles as we climbed. They were everywhere, suspended in the water like luminous dust, creating a column of infection that stretched from the sea floor toward the surface. "Kelly, check the hull integrity. Any breaches, any way for contaminated water to enter our life support systems?" She ran through the hull sensors methodically. "No breaches detected. Atmospheric pressure is stable. No indication of water infiltration." But the navigation display flickered again, and this time I was watching for it. Another line of alien code appeared, stayed visible for almost a full second, then vanished as the system self-corrected. "The prions are already inside," I said. "They came through the air filtration when we were in the contaminated bay." Michael checked his hands, looking for the telltale crystalline formations. How long before we start showing symptoms? Based on Timothy's progression? Maybe an hour. Maybe less if the concentration is high enough. Kelly was studying the life support readouts with growing alarm. The air recycling system is showing minor anomalies. Nothing dangerous yet, but the filtration efficiency is changing. I thought about Timothy, standing behind that emergency barrier, as the crystalline growths consumed his face. He'd begged me to take him to the surface, promised he could resist the conversion process. Now we were all facing the same choice he'd faced: fight the infection, or become part of something larger. "We have 6 hours to reach the surface," I said. "If we can stay human that long, we can warn the authorities before the conversion completes." "And if we can't?" I looked at the controls in front of me, thinking about the emergency systems built into every deep-sea submersible. Scuttling charges designed to prevent sensitive technology from falling into enemy hands. If the infection took hold, if we started to change, then we make sure this doesn't reach the surface. The submersible continued its slow climb through the dark water, carrying 3 humans and an unknown number of microscopic prions toward the world above. Behind us, the glowing scar of Hephaestus Station pulsed with alien purpose, a wound in the ocean floor that was already beginning to heal. The navigation display flickered again, and this time the alien code stayed visible for almost 2 seconds before disappearing. We were running out of time.